Good morning, class. Professor Pronte here, and we're here today to talk about tariffs, and more specifically, the economic impact, what occurs when a nation decides to put a tariff on some product that's being imported into their country. A lot to unpack on the graph behind me here. So first, take note that I picked some hypothetical product that we could be considering. Let's choose grapes, right? This model is going to work the best for us when we're talking about products that are perfectly competitive. And so things like agriculture fit nicely for this particular model. On the graph behind me, you can see a couple of curves that I've modeled in here. Let's start with those. These are demand and supply curves associated with grapes for our example. But notice here that in each case, we've got this little qualifying term where we're saying that this is the domestic demand. This is the domestic supply over here. Right? And so what that means is that for this graph, that's showing the behavior of all the buyers when it comes to purchasing grapes at different prices, but only domestic buyers, only the buyers here in our home country. Same thing on that domestic supply curve. That's the supply of grapes, but for the time being, ignoring international or foreign companies that might sell grapes. All right, so to start, we might try to figure out what would happen here in this market if we don't have any international trade whatsoever, right? We're closed off from trade. The term for that condition, when there's no international trade whatsoever, it's called autarky. And so you can see right over here, labeled on our board, this price of $7 represents our autarky price. That's how much these grapes would end up costing people in the event that we have no trade whatsoever. That would be our equilibrium price. The 10,000 right there in the middle would be the equilibrium quantity. That's what we get if there's no trade whatsoever, right? And we can tell that because if there's no trade, the only people who are going to be influencing the price of the good are the domestic buyers and the domestic sellers, right? Which is what we have on the domestic supply and demand curves respectively. Okay. For most products though, we don't see this condition of autarky, right? Being closed off from trade in the real world. Instead, we allow things like grapes or whatever it is we're considering to flow across international borders. And so when that takes place, there becomes a new price for the good, right? This is called the world price in our model. And so where does that world price come from? We're saying here that this world price is 4, right? You would take that as a given thing, something that's given to you on a problem like this. It'll be labeled just like so, as the world price. And so why am I saying 4? We're saying that if you allow all the buyers and all the sellers, domestic and international, right? American companies and American buyers, foreign companies, foreign buyers, everybody mingled all together, then the equilibrium price of the good is $4 now. Okay, and so that world price, when we're opened up to international trade, becomes the appropriate number to consider for people, right? It's not the case that when you go to the store, there's domestic grapes and imported grapes, and there's a $7 price and a $4 price. No, instead, for most products, we just see one price for that good, right? Regardless of where the good is coming from. So that's where we get this world price of $4. Okay, so we'll take that price as a given, right? That's the fact. If you're buying grapes, that's what you're going to end up paying. If you're selling grapes, that's what you're going to end up receiving. And we want to look to our respective curves here to see how domestic buyers and domestic sellers end up responding to this, right? That's a big lesson from microeconomics. When the price changes, the quantities demanded or supplied change correspondingly. So the price is 4, we read over. It's really important here to see which curve we're running into, right? That curve that we run into first is the domestic supply curve, isn't it? So because we're evaluating here the domestic supply curve at this price of 4, the quantity that falls underneath here shows us the domestic quantity supplied. It's the amount of grapes that domestic firms, American firms, are willing and able to sell if the price is $4. Okay. Buyers, though, change their behavior when the price is down here at $4 as well. We read over further, right, at this world price of $4, the domestic quantity demanded, because it came off the domestic demand curve, the domestic quantity demanded is 15,000. All right, and so these are the two numbers that we want to evaluate. What we're saying here is that once we've opened up this country to international trade when it comes to grapes, the domestic buyers are willing and able to buy 15,000. The domestic sellers are only willing and able to sell 6,000. And so that difference between the two, the 15,000 minus that 6,000, would represent imported grapes if the world price is 4. And you can do the subtraction to say exactly how much is going to be imported. So you would just say 15,000 minus 6,000 for 9,000. I should have wrote that, but I don't have that with me. 9,000 imported grapes when the price is 4. Just comparing the 6,000 and the 15,000 right there. Okay. So from that point, right, as we were talking about in earlier videos, give my little plug to see the other videos on the channel as well. Countries will sometimes enact protectionist policies. They'll use a tariff, they'll use a quota, they'll do something to help out potentially the domestic firms. Right? And so when a tariff then is applied, we can use the model to figure out more specifically what's going to happen in this market. Right? And so this second horizontal line here that we've modeled in shows us that world price of $4 with a $2 tariff that's been added on the top of it. That's how we got up to 6. We started at the world price of 4, and because this tariff is 2, we added $2 on top. And so what that means is that now for all the buyers and sellers in this market, the relevant price is not the $4, but it's 6. And so we just repeat the analysis then. Right? We want to see how many grapes domestic sellers are willing and able to sell. Should they charge $6? And how many grapes are domestic buyers willing and able to buy? Should they be forced to pay $6? And so now, I hope you guys can see this. Zoom in if you need to. The quantities in question are 9,000, showing us the domestic quantity supplied, and 11,000, the domestic quantity demanded. So that difference now of only 2,000 grapes would represent the imports that we see after this tariff is put into place. Okay. So this is kind of a technical one to sort of summarize what I want you guys to take from this, right? We want to use a graph like this to be able to answer questions about what the effects of a tariff are, right? And so you want to just compare these numbers, right? So let's look at the tariff from the viewpoint of the buyers, right? Before the tariff was put into place, buyers were buying 15,000 grapes at a price of only $4. After the tariff, they ended up buying fewer of them and facing higher prices. When it comes to consumers, the tariff has been harmful for them. What about for the sellers? Pre-tariff, right? Sellers were selling only 6,000 units of grapes at a price of 4. After we put in place this tariff, now they're selling 9,000. They're selling more of them at the higher price of 6. So for domestic sellers, the tariff is a good thing. This is helping them. Those are some conclusions we can draw pretty safely. There's other things to kind of pull out of this as well. Imports are falling after we put in place that tariff. So we can draw the conclusion then that this tariff is bad news. It's harmful for sellers who are in another country, right? Who used to be able to sell their sell more grapes to domestic buyers here in the home country, and then after the tariff, have a harder time doing so. We're also going to see here some tax revenue that's generated. Right, this tariff here is representing $2 of tax per unit. After the tariff is applied, like we said, we have 2,000 units that are imported, that 11,000 minus the 9,000. So 2,000 units times $2 of tax per unit would give us $4,000 of tax revenue. So that's something to glean from the graph as well. Okay, guys, that's all for this one. I'll see you in the next video. Bye now.